in case of comparative literature, when all over the Europe, that is, there was two droughts, that is, many countries were getting independence, and they try to find out their cultural origin, that is the historical past and the cultural past of uh, their heritage, and they talked that cultural is an identity of a nation, and that identity will be the root of language. And we have talked that is uh, many literature, especially the Czech literature, that was influenced by a text that is actually claimed that the Czech literature had a past, and this is their own literature, and claiming that literature, next time other writer of Czech, they influence one literature was influenced will be influenced by others, and other literature will also influence the different literature. That was the term that was derived from the French School of Comparative Literature. And in that regard, we have talked about that is the Czech Romantic Revival, and uh, inspired by Czech previous literature and culture, the Czech literature was influenced by other writers. And these other writers, that is Karel Hynek Macha also inspired wrote many things inspired by this kind of writing. That means the past writing, and that is the old tradition of a culture and of a nation. And that tradition started with the idea of nationalism. That means every country was trying to pinpoint their cultural heritage, and having the cultural heritage, they were inspired, and uh, they were trying to write their own literature. In this regard, we see another term that is the cultural heritage, that is derived from the genuine and authentic information of a group of people. And in the group of people in the European countries at the time, at that time, that means that towards the ending period of 18th century, every country were trying to identify their own identity, and that cultural heritage was derived from their authentic identity. So every country was claiming that this is their past, and this is uh, and based on their past tradition, they were trying to produce literature. And in such a way, comparative literature was gaining its root to the cultural identity, and um, uh, culture became an integral part of comparative literature. In order to understand the term comparative literature, nationalism and cultural identity, these two terms came forward all over the Europe to identify their own culture, their national culture, as well as their national identity. And here, in this regard, we can give an example, that is one poet. His name is James Macpherson, a Scottish writer and poet and literary character. This uh, Scottish writer, as we know that in uh, In 1762, James Macpherson's Finzel appeared, and it is a writing that is uh, James Macpherson compiled, and Macpherson is considered as the first Scottish poet to gain an international reputation. So this poet uh, translated the ocean circle of epic poems, and in UK, Scotland, Ireland, and England, Wales, they are the country. But James Macpherson, uh, he translated the ocean circle of epic poems. So this translation create an effect in identifying the Gaelic culture. That means the Scottish language is called Gaelic. So whenever he translated this ocean circle of epic poems, that created a tremendous result in identifying the culture, especially not the English culture, especially the Scottish culture. And he claimed that uh, this uh, Gaelic epic, that means the language of Scotland is called Gaelic. So this Gaelic epic written by Irish bard Ossian, Macpherson himself claimed that. But with whenever James Macpherson translated this Irish poem in Gaelic language, that became uh, uh, that's become an asset of Scottish writing. So Finzel is an example of such ancient epic poem translated by James Macpherson. And Macpherson also produced a collection of poetry collected in the Highlands of Scotland. Scotland is a country. There you will see the hilly areas, and these hilly areas, their culture, their environment, everything is different from England, and they have their own identity. So this person, James Macpherson, he also translated many poems composed based on the Highlands of Scotland. We are talking about that is comparative literature and culture. How culture became the part of comparative literature. Previously, we have taught that French school of comparative literature, they thought about influence, that how literature will be influenced by other literature, and how one great literature will influence other. So we are talking that is one literature will influence other, and other literature will influence other. Here, with the publications of James Macpherson, we have got another um, thing, that is culture can also be a part of comparative literature. Culture will will identify some nations identity, and same way culture can be a way part of comparative literature. So James Macpherson proved that, and Finzel is an example of such kind of writing. And here, based on the uh, writing uh, of Ocean Circle, a short history of comparative literature formed in the earliest times to the present day, that was published in 1906 as a Northern Dante, that means the Italian poet, a great and a majestic. Ocean subject matter combined romance, heroism, accounts of mythical lands, and savage lyricism, probably derived from the folk version of ocean poem. So these are the part of a nation's culture. That means heroism, mythical aspects, and lyricism and savagery. That is the part of uh, Irish culture, but getting translated by the writings of James Macpherson. That writing also influenced the Gaelic culture, that means the Scottish culture. So Macpherson had a good knowledge of ancient Gaelic poetry to produce his forgeries. So here we see the term. That means the ocean, the term is derived from the Ireland. Okay, so the Galley legend, a legendary hero and the poet and the son of Finn, who is supposed to have lived during the 3rd century AD, presented in Galley poems and the imitation of the written by James Macpherson in 18th century. And actually, the term ocean is derived from Irish, an anglicized form of the Irish ocean, and the Scottish Gaelic ocean. The later names are derived from the byname constructed from the element. So, in such a way, by the publications of Ocean, Macpherson created a different part, integral part of comparative literature. So Macpherson worked on French, Italian, Polish, and Czech literary systems and speculated that the reasons for the success of Ocean poems. Actually, after the publications done by translation done by James Macpherson, French literature, Italian and Poland literature, they were also enriched. And in such a way, Macpherson was included in the curriculum of English department in many parts of this world, ranking equally with Byron as a fundamental author of the late 18th and the early 19th century. So Macpherson appears barely as a footnote to the vast majority of students of English literature uh, and English-speaking world. But our concern is that how culture was included in comparative literature. With the publication of James Macpherson, cultural identity included, and such cultural identity and the cultural legacy can inspire others writer as well. That is the writings of French, Italian, and Polish writers and Czech writers as well. So, in one hand, the impact of Macpherson works is great in different literary scene, and the political reality of his age cannot be denied. On the other hand, Dr. Johnson accused Macpherson of forgery from the beginning. So there is a claim that means in previous class we have talked about that Czech literature was uh, improved from past heritage. Next time, it was assumed that it was proved that actually Czech heritage was a forgery. It is not the Czech literature, but they got influenced. In the same way, Macpherson work was a tremendous had a tremendous effect towards the comparative literature or towards the revival of the literature of the other part of this world. But it is a forgery that was claimed by Dr. Johnson next time. So, uh, but it is not the fact of his forgery that Macpherson is not taught in Britain, as his forgery had no impact in Italy and Poland. Rather, Macpherson's success or failure was dependent on his text role in the haughty European debate of national culture and national identity. So, whether it may be the forgery or the real one, it doesn't matter. But Macpherson's work's success became uh, became effective and became a way that inspired the national culture and national identity all over the world. In such a way, national identity and national culture was included in comparative literature. And in Britain, Scottish and Irish nationalism were feared and despised that there was a vested interest in denying the possibility of the great literary and the poetic past to both Scottish and the Irish culture. In other nations like France, Italy, Poland, they tried to establish their national identity by rediscovering the past, and they did it by translating the best literature of other nations. And uh, these are why Macpherson is taught in Italy, France, and Poland, but not in Britain. So, in two ways, one way with the publication of James Macpherson, the other countries' literature was improved, and not only that, the other countries, other European countries, were trying to find their past, that means the cultural legacy, what is their cultural heritage. So that is important in case of the publication or the translation done by James Macpherson. So that is about culture and literature. So next we see another writer, that is Anne Bradstreet, the most prominent of the early English poet of North America and the first writer in England's North America colonies to be published. She is the first Puritan figure in American literature, notable her large corpus of poetry as well as personal writings published posthumously. So, what did she do? She is an American writer. So, in case of culture, there is a colonial legacy as well, and as well as there is a um, imperial legacy. That means America at the time was a part of England. America didn't got independence up to 1976. So whenever in 1976 the American Revolution started and America got independence, America became a free state. At that time, this writer like Anne Bradstreet, they started writing their own culture. Of course, American literature may be taken English writer as a model, but their literature uh, is the identity of American culture, is the identity of the American nation. Okay, so getting out of the imperial role, that means the England roles, when America got independence, this character like writer like Anne Bradstreet and others, they try to pinpoint their writings in their own way, though they followed the model of English writers writing model. And same thing happening to the Latin American writers. They try to publish their policy, censorship, stylistic constraint, and a host of other legacies from Spain and Portugal. And nevertheless, seeing a revolutionary struggle to link to the emergence of the new literature. So whenever America got independence, America got free from the imperial power. That means they, before American Revolution, America was a part of England, so they didn't have their individual identity. So after getting freedom, America got independence and they got their own identity in terms of their state and also in terms of their culture. And that was proved by many American and Latin American writers like and Bradstreet and others. Okay. So here literary development of the New World reflected a new order in complete contrast to the attitude of colonial power to the literature produced by the people under the domination. So whenever the country like America and other parts got independence, they were developing their literature in a completely different way, not in the colonial domination. It is their own legacy. It is their own identity. And here, uh, a former British secretary at Wire, historian and essayist, Macaulay, he said that he uh, has compared, he has said that, I'm reading the line, I have never found one among them, that means Orientalist, who could deny that a single shelf of a good European literature was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. So this man, in his imperial perspectives, from the colonial perspectives, this British Secretary at Law and History, he said that in European library, one shelf can be compared with the whole range of India and Arabic literature. He said so. I have certainly never met with any audience who ventured to maintain that the Arabic and the Sanskrit poetry could be compared to that of the great European nation. That means Macaulay disregarded the importance of Arabic and Indian literature and the Sanskrit language always. And in such a way, they had a colonialistic attitude. That means they said that their literature is great and vast in quantity, and the Arabic and the Indian literature are less important and they are less in number as well. Also, in case of the art, they are inferior in comparison to European literature, according to Macaulay. Macaulay said so. And another fantastic comment done by this writer, Edward Fitzgerald, or Fitzgerald, you can say. And this man translated Rabayat Omar Khan, translation of Rabayat of Omar Khayyam, which was kept in its reputation and popularity since the 1860 decades. So what did like Macaulay? Uh, Lord Macaulay's attack on the cultural heritage of the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent strikes us today as both racist and absurd, and yet underlying assumption of Macaulay's position were widely shared. And here, Edward Fitzgerald, who translated of the Rubaiyat Khayyam, become one of the great classic poems of the 19th century, also a low opinion of Oriental literature. So Fitzgerald himself translated Rubaiyat Khayyam, but he himself had a low opinion. In his word, that means in Fitzgerald's word, it is an amusement to me, he wrote to his friend Cornell on March 20th, 1857, to take what liberties I like with this Persian who, as I think, are not poets enough to frighten one from such exertion, or who really do want a little art to shape them. So Fitzgerald himself translated Rubaiyat Omar Khayyam, but he was not happy with the art of Persian literature, and also he had a tendency to demean the importance of Persian literature. So, like Macaulay, Fitzgerald also did so. And after that, belief in the superiority of own culture was a part of politics in imperialism. So, in comparative literature, there will be a idea of superior culture by the uh, European writer and critic and historian, and they always thought that the other literature and culture are inferior in comparison to European culture. So this oral culture was generally regarded as being lower status. So the existence of the tradition of the oral epic, for example, was considered insignificant. At the same time, because of the importance of the written epic of the European tradition, those culture which had no epic, which saw the lyric as the highest form of poetry, was also downgraded. Homer and the Greeks, the plays of Shakespeare, the poetry of Spenser and Mental, these were the texts against which other works were measured, found wanting. So in Indian subcontinent, we have got great epic, that means Ramayana, Mahabharata, Another written in Sanskrit. Okay, Indian, European uh, writer and the critic, they said that lyric poem is their highest form of poetry. They have no epic poem. Still, they disregard the importance of Indian and Asian and the Persian culture. Why? They say that uh, the epic poem composed in Indian and Persian, they are derived from the oral version. And for this reason, they disregard the importance of the literature as well as the culture of the other part of this world. So, in such a way, that is the uh, the journey, that is the history of comparative literature was going on. And the existence of an alternative picture, the revolutionary uh, poet whose plays about the disposition of the unjust ruler were staged across Europe in the cities uh, seething with revolutionary emerging energy was not permissible. So here, among the Indian, Jawaharlal Nehru commented against this comment, especially the Macaulay and also the Fitzgerald comment. So he said, Jawaharlal Nehru said, which of these two Englands came to India? So Jawaharlal Nehru found two different characteristics of English people. He said that means England came to rule Indian subcontinent. So which England came to India? The England of Shakespeare or Milton? That means they have great literature written, composed by Shakespeare and Milton. Of noble speech and writing and the brave deed of political revolution and the struggle for freedom of the science and the technological progress, or so this portion is composed at the good side of England. That means they have great literature like William Shakespeare and Milton. They have good speech, the political revolution and the struggle for freedom. That means they love democracy and the scientific and technological progress that happened in England. So which England came to, and the next part and the other part on the other side of the England, that is the England of the savage penal code. So we know that in Indian subcontinent, these the people, that means the imperial people, they applied their civil code, the district code that was initiated by the British government in Indian subcontinent, and that was very severe, savage penal code, brutal behavior without any cause. They could punish and they could kill a person. That attitude of England people were brutal, and the intense feudalism and reaction. For this, there are two Englands. Just as in every country, there were these two aspects of national character and civilization. So if there is a national character, so the people of England, they are proud of their culture. So in their culture, we have seen actually, according to the words of Jawaharlal Nehru, they have good and jovial character and the artistic character, as they have the writer, right, William Shakespeare and other, and at the same time, they have a civic character as well. And this culture, that is one national culture and the culture of their civilization. So this way, which was will be taken and which one will be taken granted as the national culture of England, the savage one or the culture, artistic culture written by William Shakespeare and John Milton, like that. So that comment put by Jawaharlal Nehru. So men like Macaulay, liberal intellectuals, were a genuine belief in the superiority of their own culture. So Macaulay is proud of their culture, that means the European culture. But it has been a generalized, everybody likes his or her own culture. Okay, so vision of their work, their own culture, superiority of their own culture. So they say that their culture is great. We say that our culture is great. And the vision of the world that involve strict hierarchies based on the class, race, color, and were also engaging in comparison. So whenever culture of a country will be a part of comparative literature. So here we can compare the uh, hierarchies based on class, race, and color that can also be compared in comparative literature. As we have seen that according to the speech of Jawaharlal Nehru, that we have seen two kinds of England. In the same way, we can also compare the race, color, and the other engaging elements in a culture can be compared in comparative literature. The problem was that the inhabitability compared negatively. Some literature were worth less than others. Some were unique in having universal importance, and others could be disregarded as primitive or banal. So, in one hand, we have great literature, and in another hand, we have less important or primitive or banal literature. So, the question of the universal value of an author or a work was fundamental to the colonist viewpoint, and for it enabled claims to be made that set works apart from all other consideration, arguing that a writer such as Shakespeare, and for example, uh, was on a higher plane than almost anyone else. So the basis of the claim of universally tended, as they still do, to argue for some kind of common transcultural sharing of emotional experience and disregarded the vicissitudes of literary history. So actually they say that their culture is great, but everybody will say that their culture is great. Okay, so always there will be a question in which way they are claiming that their culture is great, but there is a division. So that division can be a part of comparative literature. In such a way, culture is integrated to literature, and that can be compared in comparative literature. Ben Jonson was considered to be the greater writer than Shakespeare by the contemporaries and by the subsequent generation for well over a century after his death was ignored. By the time Shakespeare was being exported to India and the other colonies in the mid 19th century, and his compatriots regarded his universal greatness as a matter of fact. Okay, so once upon a time, Ben Jonson was thought that a better writer than William Shakespeare. But next time, when English people exported William Shakespeare to the other parts of this world in such a way, Shakespeare became the great writer. So, what is the parameter? How we can judge one writer or one culture great? Is there any parameter? According to many comparatives and critics, they say that no, there is no parameter. Actually, we can call one literature great and we can call the other literature less important. So cultural colonialism was also a form of comparative literature in such a way. Okay, so cultural colonialism was also a form of comparative literature. In the writers were imported by the colonizing group, and the native writers were evaluated negatively in comparison. Okay, so that is the scenario of comparative literature. In 1976, C.L. Wren gave the presidential address of the Modern Humanities Research Association in Chicago, and then in London 2 weeks later, entitled The Idea of Comparative Literature, in which he suggested that clearly fundamental differences in pattern of thinking among peoples must impose relatively narrow limits. An African language, for example, is incompatible with the European one for joint approaches in comparative study. Even Sanskrit, though it's itself an Indo-European language, among with other Indian ramifications, present a pattern of thought which renders any sort of literal translation of every limited view. So C.L. Roy, he said that actually African language cannot be compared with European one. So this is in which perspectives, with perspectives, his perspectives is of no value. That means he goes on to say that comparative study of Paradise Lost and the Ramayana, for example, can only discuss the parallels, differences in subject matter and treatment at the expense of the poetry, and suggests that this is inevitable because of the different nature of Sanskrit thought and feeling. Okay, so C.L. Rain, he said that this such kind of comparison cannot be compared, that can be compared with a way that can be called parallels. Because according to his judgment, he said that comparative literature can be compared the parallels. Okay, not they think that the European language or the European literature cannot be compared with Indian language or African language or Indian language or literature. In such a way, comparative literature was included. That means cultural colonialism and cultural imperialism and the cultural identity can be a part of comparative literature in such a way. And here we uh, we will simply tell some other schools of comparative literature apart from this. That is, uh, if we move forward, that is, the term comparative literature appeared in the age of transition in Europe as nations struggle for independence from the Ottoman Empire, from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, from France, from Russia, new nation states came into being. National identity was inextricably bound up with the national culture. So, uh, uh, up to the 19th century, most of the countries are occupied by some great imperial power like Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, France, and Russia. And towards the end of 19th century, many countries were getting independence. When they are getting imperial independence, they are getting their own culture. And this later comparatists may have chosen to ignore the heated political context in which first statement about comparative literature were made, but it is striking to note that even whilst ideas of universal literary roots were being discussed, among with ideas about the spirit of soul of a nation, comparisons were being made that evolved evaluating one culture higher than others. Okay, so whenever many countries were getting independence from the Ottoman Empire, France, Russia, and the other imperial power, they were trying to pinpoint their identity as well as they thought that the one culture can also be compared with other culture. And also here, France is the most sensitive of all countries. His Hilary Teshal, he commented that to what? That means France wanted to compare France to Europe and also Europe to other parts of the world. So that is his attitude. Attitude. That means it is commented by Philippe Deschamps in his speech that is delivered in 1835. So he said that is, and complete contempt for narrow-minded and blind patriotism. So Philippe Deschamps, he said that the France always tried to compare themselves with other European countries, and also France want to compare themselves with the other words of this country. So Charles, he said that it is a blind patriotism, according to, and because they say that this is the way France people, they wanted to establish their own superiority rather than the other parts of this world. And already we have said Lord Macaulay's speech. So his attitude, that means Macaulay's attitude when he consigned Indian and Arabian literature to the scrap heap was not like Shal. For he too had an absolute belief that the superiority of his own culture, both were product of the European Europe of the time. So that was the scenario of comparative literature that was going on towards the world in the history. And even Goethe remarks about world literature need to be seen in context, for although eventually turned his attention to the literature of the continent beyond Europe, he coined the term world literature related to the views on Europe. So Goethe is an important person regarding the comparative literature because he said a term that is world literature. Actually, here this can become explained in such a way. Actually, Goethe put the term world literature in terms of the literature produced in Europe. It means that Goethe thought that the literature produced in Europe that are great and the other literature are not great. So that is a point to note. So in such a way, comparative literature was moved on, and next time we see uh, that in 1897 in Lyon, the first chair was set up. The first chair of comparative literature was set up in Lyon in 1897. So, in the history, through the gradual vicissitudes of comparative literature, that moved on and moved on through the several channels like culture, channel like national identity, channel like imperial identity, channel like colonial identity. In such a way, the first chair of comparative literature was established in Lyon, France in 1897. However, so next chair of comparative literature established in actually in this way, we can say that American chair of comparative literature that was established in Harvard at Harvard in 1890. So if in this regard regarding the history, if we say that which one is the first chair of comparative literature, you have to say that is the American chair of comparative literature that was established at Harvard in 1980. But the idea that is in Lyon, that means in France, chair of comparative literature that was established in 1897. So these are the chairs of comparative literature in case of the history of comparative literature. Okay, and next time we have seen that the Hachon Macaulay presented a professor of classic and English literature in University College, Auckland, New Zealand. So in New Zealand, there was another chair that was established in new idea of comparative literature, published a full length of study the subject entitled Comparative Literature in 1886. So here in New Zealand, Auckland, we see the history that is their idea, especially the comparative literature, they showed it in 1886. In such a way, they are the first. Okay, and the first set up in 1879 by Hugo Maltese Lomijo, a German-speaking scholar from Chu in one down Romania, was a multilingual publications entitled comparative literature like that. And this was followed by two periodicals edited by German scholar Max Korn and other scholars as well. So throughout the 19th century, use of the term comparative literature was flexible. Self-styled comparatists followed the principles outlined by Humpty Dumpty, who points out to Alice that when he used the term, it means just I choose to mean neither the literature and the other parts, nor less. Okay. So in such a way, another thing is that in the early French studies of comparative literature focused on the Middle Age, okay, and um, Dante, hailed as a father of Italian language, after all, priest and provincial poet um, Anatole Daniel as as his master, granting his the supreme honor of the following the special native language. Okay, so these are the way comparative literature getting in existence, and comparative literature got its root. So comparative literature started with the comment of some great writer, Matthew Arnold and others. And next time, it comparative literature goes to other field of literature, that means the translation status. So next time, first time, the French school of comparative literature, they thought about the influence. So what type of influence? That means literary influence and the influence of culture. And next time we have seen that national identity and national culture was integrated in the way of comparison. In which way? That means when in many European countries and American continent, America got independence from the imperial power, they try to pinpoint their own identity. They try to pinpoint their own cultural heritage. And through the cultural heritage, they had been producing several categories of literature in a way to identify their own identity. In such a way, at Harvard, the first chair of comparative literature was established in 1890, and in France, the chair of comparative literature that was established in 1897, and we have seen in New Zealand, Auckland, we have seen chair or the idea of comparative literature, especially they have published two periodicals that was in 1987. 87. So that is the history of comparative literature we have gone through. So it means that comparative literature has gone through a journey, that means through a fluctuation of several integration with culture, language, imperialism, and colonialism, and became a genre of interest for all over the world. Okay, so that is the end of our today's class. So next time we will try to improve the lectures.